we're not really capturing the actual atmosphere. It's always the perception.
Welcome to the Pixel Paper Podcast, a series where we get to know the creative processes behind up-and-coming digital artists. My name is Noor, graphic designer and work-in-progress artist, and I'll be your host for this series. In today's episode, we have someone who was actually my former university classmate. Diana is studying her master's in architecture at Manchester School of Architecture. We dive deep into art philosophies and perceptions whilst talking about Diana's dissertation and generally just having a discussion on the overlap between art, architecture, and atmosphere. I think deep thinkers will really like this episode, so sit back, get comfy, and enjoy. Hi Diana, how are you?
Hi, good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. So for the benefit of our audience, can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Diana Urstacheanu from Romania, but moved to UK about 5 years ago to study architecture. And I'm currently doing my master at Manchester School of Architecture. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Nice. So Diana and I, we attended the same bachelor's degree together. So that's how I know of Diana. And I remember when I used to see your work in studio, I was always so in awe of your work. I mean, it's just so creative and colorful. And I think that also comes across in your digital illustrations as well. So could you tell us a bit more about your work?
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And yeah, to be honest, my work used to be really colorful, especially in first and second year of uni. It kind of changed, but still, yeah. Well, about my work, I kind of, it sounds quite cliche, but I've always been drawing ever since I was small. So I used to experiment with a lot of techniques, but mostly analog. So I used pencils, ink, watercolor, colored pencils, acrylic tempera, quite a lot. But it used to be really colorful, and I feel like it still is. I kind of slowed down when I joined architecture school, but still, I feel like because I started drawing more digitally on the iPad, I have this freedom a bit to still add a lot of color. And yeah, about a year and a half ago, I started to use the iPad more often. Up until then, I was mostly using analog and using that for both uni and my personal work. But kind of ever since I started doing digitally, I also started to share, and I created the Instagram page that you know. So yeah, I feel like that's how I would describe my work up until now.
Yeah, okay, that's cool. I mean, this was a question that I had later on actually, but I think we can just bring it in now. You mentioned that your work kind of slowed down in a way in terms of color because you started your architecture degree. So, I mean, do you feel that architecture in a way limits your creative potential, for example, in color choices? And do you think that there's a way to strike a balance?
To be honest, I feel like it does in terms of color, but in terms of creativity, I don't think so. I mean, I feel like here I'm just talking about architecture school because in practice the answer is yes. I feel like it's sort of different if we're thinking about architecture school and practice. But yeah, in terms of color, I feel like there is some sort of limitation, but not necessarily a bad thing. I feel like, as I said, in the beginning, in first and second year, I used to have really colorful plans and actives and all sorts of drawings. But as time has passed, I feel like it's just become more controlled rather than diminish the color choices. I feel like it's just more controlled, and it can be limited to some extent, but it depends how you view it. For example, especially after a while of looking at drawings and how things are done, because there is this limitation, you can use it in your advantage to create really powerful images, and you can still use the only a few colors in your drawings to produce something really amazing.
Right. So it's kind of like maturing in a way.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's definitely something that I think is quite relevant and correct, perhaps, because even for myself, like I can, now you've said it, like I'm reflecting on my first year versus my third year of architecture school, and like, yeah, there's definitely a kind of more mature perspective to color and stuff like that. So, yeah, I think that's cool actually. But having said that, your digital art is very colorful and very kind of, wild, and it's got these really warm vibes. So, what inspires and influences your digital art?
Yeah, well, the thing is with digital art, because you have unlimited resources for color, like it's quite tempting in a way. And because I'm in a stage where I'm still exploring digital art, I feel like it's the same thing as it happened with architecture in a way. Like I'm really tempted to use so many colors, but in a way, it's not necessarily what I want at the minute. You know, uh, but still, with the colors that I'm using, I'm trying to communicate something to the viewer. So uh, in some cases, they're used on purpose to transmit an emotion, or just to emphasize the environment that I'm producing.
Mm. Hmm. And most of your color palettes are quite warm. So you mentioned
Yeah,
that you want to communicate something through color. So is there a reason why most of the time you're using warm color palettes?
yeah, I feel like they just create more a cozier environment,
Mm.
and most of the times that's what I want to encapsulate, like just uh, to capture a moment, an intimate moment, and transmit that to my followers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I I mean I can definitely see like the intimacy in the work that you're producing. And more often than not, the characters in your artwork are women, and the characters
Yeah,
also don't have faces. So is there a reason behind this?
it's funny because as any architecture student or architect is gonna say, I don't really know how to draw people. So most of the times I'm using people just to emphasize that moment that I'm creating, and to kind of use them in that, like just to animate the space, really, not necessarily to focus on them. But sometimes it does happen to that the character that I'm bringing in the image, it's actually the focus of that illustration. But the faceless women that I'm using are, so I'm not really good at drawing figures and all the facial expressions that they have. So, and in a way, I'm not even trying to do that. I'm just trying, as I said, to complement the environment rather than focus the attention on them. But because because I started getting commissions, sometimes I include a few, but still try to limit that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. I was gonna say, so do you come up with the space first before you come up with the character, or is it kind of how does it work when you're coming up with these pieces?
I feel like firstly I'm just thinking about what I want to communicate and what I want to capture, but most of the times the environment comes first, and then I try to uh, choose a person, or just to explore the position of the character in that space in order to emphasize it. Yeah, most of the times it's the environment and the feeling.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really interesting that you mentioned that the character it's kind of like a, not an afterthought, but you're just kind of putting the character there to animate the space. Because for me, at least, when I'm looking at your work, the character is the first thing I'm drawn to, really,
Oh,
in
really?
the composition. Yeah, so it's, for me, like the background is almost secondary. Like the character's kind of where the story is, and the
Mm-hmm.
setting is kind of just helping that story, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think it's really interesting what you said.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you said that because I mean, I'm kind of expecting in a way to do that mainly because you're looking at the character from the space before observing what's around that person, and in a way, I'm kind of drawn to look at that when looking at other person's work, just because I feel like it's an instinct rather than yeah, it's an instinct, but in a way, I feel like that's another reason why I don't add facial expression to the characters. Like I feel like I want people to think that they're in that environment, and rather than uh, kind of show how that person interacts with the space.
Mm-hmm. It's almost kind of like filling in the blank as well. Like, you're
Mm-hmm.
leaving some room for the viewer to kind of interpret what expression the person has.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You do as well a lot of traditional art. I mean, if you scroll down like all the way to the bottom of your feed, I can see that. And I still remember seeing this on my Instagram feed. There's these drawings of shells and things,
Yeah.
and like
Yeah.
flowers. They're just so gorgeous, and like
Thank
really, they're
you.
so beautiful. And I wanted to know how traditional art contributes to your digital practice.
I feel like it's quite a tricky question because um, in a way I was so used to drawing on paper and kind of feeling that texture. But a lot of the skills that I use in digital art are just uh, somehow an adaptation of the ones that I use on paper. In a way, it's quite tricky to say exactly what's what because I kind of follow the process that I would follow if I was to draw on paper. It's exactly the same process. But I feel like even the loose sketch that I do uh, at the beginning, it's kind of influenced by the analog technique that I use on paper, and also maybe because I used to use colored pencils or watercolor on paper. I feel like building up the color on paper is kind of reflected on the digital drawing as well. So I feel like I still kind of use that, but it's in a way really similar, but at the same time completely different than uh, what you would do on paper because you don't have. I feel like you have more control on uh, on the iPad with the colors with the watercolor brushes than you do on paper. So I feel like the skills are uh, from the analog, but they're just uh, kind of adapted to the digital ones.
Mm, right. So when you are starting a digital piece, do you start off with a sketch, or how does the workflow kind of go?
Mm-hmm. I mean, it depends um, if it's a personal illustration that I'm doing or commission. Because, but to be honest, they are quite similar. Um, usually I start with an idea, with a feeling or an environment that I have in my mind, or the inspiration that I got from somewhere. And if it's a commission, then obviously the client has a brief for that. But usually it's just a concept, and then I'm either starting to do a few sketches or look for inspiration. It's either on Pinterest or on my other pieces that I did before. Or if the client says, "Oh, I really liked this drawing. Can you do something similar?" Then I would do that. And then I feel like the sketch is one of the most important things that I do. I do a really loose sketch, and try the colors as well. But nothing is defined at that stage. And after I decide on the composition, then I move forward to drawing on top of the sketch, and try to define each element, and then add color and shading, texture, light, and then final touches at the end.
Mm-hmm. And do you do the sketches on paper or on digital paper?
I feel like at the beginning I used to do them on paper, on physical paper, but now I'm just using the iPad to do them. And in a way, it's quite good to do that, because then you can just draw on top of it and still maintain the proportions that you did on the sketch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But do you feel like, in a way, just starting straight on the iPad is kind of maybe hindering the process or affecting it in a different way than if you had started physically?
It's a good question. It can be limited in a way if you start on iPad, just because I feel like when I'm doing something on paper, it's more fluid, and there's some sort of impulse of drawing. Where if you start on iPad, because you have all these tools to help you do the drawing more correct, like you have you can use the line to be really straight, and then erase. I feel like it's more impulsive and to do it on paper. So in a way, I feel like it can be limited, but that's probably something that I started to not care that much. When trying to do a sketch on iPad, I'm not trying to make it perfect from the beginning, and just trying to do what I would do on paper.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the reason I asked that is, of course, like in architecture school, they tell you don't jump straight into SketchUp or Revit or
Yeah.
whatever. Like, you should start with a model and you should start with like, just random sketches or whatever. Just start analog before you jump into digital.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And your backgrounds, are they inspired from real life or like are they from pictures online? How do you find the inspiration for your backgrounds?
Both. Yeah, so sometimes I just, as I said, if I have an image in my head, oh, I want to do something that has a lot of plants, or has, I don't know, for one background that kind of I remember really clearly was the one with from Love Week. I don't know if you remember the series, but I have had like 6. Yeah. So for the one called Love Your Heritage, I had a clear image in my mind of how that space would look like. But then, yeah, it was a traditional bedroom. So I kind of had a clear image in my mind, but then I kind of started doing the research on all the patterns, and trying to look for inspiration that I can use for that environment. Other times, it just happens in a way to see a picture and to really like the setting, and then use that as a base and then develop it and reinterpret it in my way in drawings.
Yeah, that's cool. And do you focus subconsciously or consciously on perspective and on like kind of the architectural aspects of backgrounds?
I feel like I do, but not all the time. Sometimes it depends. I feel like it depends on the drawing. Because obviously, if you have an interior, I would really focus on trying to maintain the perspective. But other times, not really. But I think so. It kind of brings a level of honesty in a way. How that image would look like in a way, and if the perspective is not really there, you would kind of notice that, or at least I would.
Yeah. Yeah,
Mm.
that's fair enough. Because I mean, I feel like sometimes maybe if we're so focused on the perspective, we kind of forget the intent of the image. So that's why I was wondering your take on it.
Yeah. I feel like it's quite important to maintain that, but not exactly to the point where you're just really focusing on the perspective. I mean, sometimes I kind of change it just a bit, just to make it look a bit better, but there is an impulse there, I think, to make it look like it's in perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you feel like you, this may sound like a strange question, but do you put your emotions into your work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like 100%. I feel like I feel like it kind of has to do with how I treat drawing in a way. Like growing up, I feel like I used to draw whenever I was feeling really happy or really sad, or kind of constantly drawing. And it is a way of expressing. So I feel like that's why I always try to put a lot of emotion and into the drawings.
So let's maybe go back to the architecture aspect. You're currently doing your master's, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So you're doing your thesis on the role of perception in the representation of atmosphere. Did I get that right?
Yeah. I mean, it's not only the perception, but mostly about the role of atmosphere in drawings. But I'm kind of really looking at the perception in one chapter. So
And has this journey contributed to your digital art journey at all?
I think so, but to be honest, I haven't really made a lot of illustrations lately because of the uni work. But in a way, I can see how it can influence me. But I feel like when I chose the topic, I was really inspired by what I was seeing in other people's work, and also what I'm trying to achieve. So I feel like the research that I did, I feel like it's gonna influence what I'm doing. Um, there are quite a lot of things that I realized when doing this research. So a lot of the exercises that I did to gain information are gonna contribute to the digital illustrations that I'm gonna do from now on.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see how it does,
Mm-hmm.
in the future, definitely. who do you go to for artistic inspiration?
To be honest, I'm not sure if I necessarily go to a certain artist or, what I did probably when I started doing digital illustrations was to look at a lot of tutorials, but in a way, I was more interested in the technique rather than the composition. So I feel like now when I'm looking or looking for inspiration, I'm trying to analyze the technique that they used. Uh, I have quite a few, and I might send you if you want the names from Instagram for a few. But um, in terms of actual inspiration for the artwork, uh, it's mostly just Pinterest, and sometimes it just happens, to have this image in my head that I want to produce. Uh, it's kind of a combination.
Is there any? I mean, the inspiration doesn't have to just be like digital artists. Like they can be anyone. Is there anything in particular, or anyone in particular?
Mm,
Like architects, musicians, writers. I mean, anyone really.
I mean, there are quite a lot, but they're quite different in a way. So, if we're talking about architecture, um, I really love Lipsky, and I kind of analyzed his drawings as well. Like they're so free yet so rigid in a way, which is so interesting to analyze. But then in terms of um, artwork, I feel like I don't. Yeah, it's so weird. I don't really have a lot of people in my mind at the moment, but there is my teacher from high school that I really admire her work, um, and I kind of really like to look at her drawings and uh, she was kind of the person that taught me how to draw. So it's quite nice to look back and see how she uses that knowledge in her own work. Um, but then there are quite a lot of um, pages that I follow on Instagram,
Mm-hmm.
and they really inspire me.
Mm-hmm. And how do you use that inspiration in your work?
I feel like as I said, maybe through the technique rather than the composition. So I kind of just look at their work, um, and try to understand why they've done a certain detail, and then maybe try to reinterpret that in my way and use that in my work. Because to give you to kind of give you an example, when I at the beginning, when I started to draw digitally, I used to watch a lot of YouTube tutorials from Gal. I can't remember his last name, uh, but that was probably a person who kind of inspired me to really um, kind of construct the object and the light and the shading. So that was one moment when I started to add more depth into my illustrations.
How do you spell his name?
G-A-R, I think.
Okay.
S something.
Okay. I mean,
I can
we'll
send
put
it
it
to
in
you.
the yeah. I'll put
Yeah,
it in the show notes anyway. So
yeah.
okay, that's cool. So that like helped you to make more realistic drawings, let's say.
Yeah, I think so, yeah. For the
Mm-hmm.
rendering part. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And would you say when you're analyzing someone else's drawing, that's more of a mental process? Like it's something that you just kind of do when you're scrolling or something? Or
Yeah.
it's more of a physical, like you sit down and analyze things?
No, I feel like it's mostly mental. Sometimes I do the physical one, but in a way, I don't know. I feel like mentally it's sometimes the easier option.
Yeah, of course, of course. No, that's cool. I mean, there's been a few artists who have, when I've interviewed them, they've said like they, do master studies of painters or whoever, and I think it's interesting because I've never done that. So I think it's a cool, it's definitely a good way of learning, definitely.
Yeah, it is. It is. Actually, yeah, I talked to a few friends as well, and they used to do that, but I don't know. I feel like in a way you would need to kind of allocate that time and
Yeah,
uh,
that's what I was thinking.
that, yeah, at the moment, as I said, I feel like it's a bit tricky, but I might try that.
Yeah, I mean, actually, that's interesting you mentioned that because I feel like now that I'm working, and maybe you feel the same as a kind of a graduate student, um, you kind of feel like there's not enough time to learn. You kind of just need to do in a way.
Yeah,
Do you feel that way?
yeah, I actually do.
Do you think it's kind of hindering maybe the process of making art?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I feel like I would kind of allocate more on just more time to understand how to do things correctly in a way. I feel like I kind of, because now I remember, when I was saying that no, I don't really analyze. I did this exercise for my dissertation because I had 14 participants for a drawing experiment, and I'm testing how they perceive the atmosphere, and now, I mean, in the last few days, I was just analyzing visually and actually marking on their drawings how they represented the atmosphere. And in a way, it's such a useful thing to do just to understand the image and the composition and maybe the reason also. So, it's a good practice that I feel like you should do at least a few times to understand how to view uh, a drawing. So, I feel like I would probably dedicate a bit of time to do that with other
Yeah,
artists.
that's cool. I mean, how do you, just out of curiosity, how do you mark the perceptions? No, wait, how do you mark the perception in someone's drawing? Or the perception of atmosphere, yeah.
Okay, so for this exercise that I did, I kind of asked them to describe an image from a place that I already like. I took the picture and I know how that place was at that time, and asked them to describe the picture using um, a set of words. Like the words that I used are from sensory notation, uh, and in a way, because I gave them that image and those words, it's a bit easier to kind of see how they view that space. But at the same time, because I did this method, it can be quite subjective just because um, obviously when you think about atmosphere, it's not only visually, it implies more senses. So in a way, they might not be that conclusive as I wanted to, just because they need to use some sort of recalling memory to attribute sounds and feelings and smells to just a visual image, if that makes sense. But I feel like that's how I use, like, just compare the image and the words and then the drawing
Mm-hmm.
and
That's interesting
just
you
try to
say
see.
that. Yeah, I mean that's interesting you say that because more often than not, especially now, it's Plan April. I don't know if you've heard of it.
No.
So it's basically in April, artists participate in a drawing challenge of like plein air drawings.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, so that's this whole challenge that's been going around on Twitter and Instagram, and more often than not, the artists draw from reference. So they draw from photos, they draw from this website called MapCrunch, which just takes you to random places on the globe. And it's interesting because they don't have that memory recall that you were talking about. They don't know what it smells like, they don't know what it feels like, but they're still drawing it. So my question is, do you think it's still possible to recreate the atmosphere without actually being there?
Mm, no, I mean, not really. I mean, the real atmosphere, probably not, but their perception, yes. Their perception of the space, definitely yes. But I mean, to be honest, yeah, no, because I was just gonna say that, uh, in a way, what I'm also describing in my dissertation is that, again, I feel like it depends what you're kind of comparing it to. Uh, because if you're like the atmosphere from a place can't really be uh, encapsulated in anything, like just because it's unique. So in a way, you don't really have anything to compare to, um, and especially because you can be you can see a thing in the morning, but then in the afternoon it can be completely different just because the light hits in a different way, just because uh, it's busier, or it's all sorts of factors.
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna ask my last question, which I've asked to everyone, and
Mm-hmm.
that is, remember a time you were stuck in a deep creative rut? How did you break free?
Well, most of the times when this happens, I just take a bit of time off just to disconnect from anything. I mean, I feel like sometimes this can even be just frustration that something uh, doesn't come as you would expected it to be. Uh, but yeah, probably just taking a bit of time off, or I started doing that as well. Just starting something new. Um, if it's a drawing, uh, a digital illustration, or anything, just starting something new, but without thinking of anything. Like just kind of leaving it. Uh,
Do you mean starting a new
for,
drawing?
yeah, like just
Okay.
starting it without a concept, without anything, just drawing. Maybe you'll have some sort of inspiration from there. I think that's how, like, these two options kind of work for me.
Mm. I think that's kind of cool because it's kind of like what you described is basically disconnecting, but in two different ways. So one is you're
Yeah,
literally disconnecting, and the second one is you're disconnecting from your thinking brain, and you're kind of just doing.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And even if they're just lines, or uh, they don't mean anything. It's still some sort of inspiration uh, if you look at it in a particular way.
Mm-hmm. And I guess even like later on, it could be inspiration, even if it's not inspiration now.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that was a great discussion, Diana. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me, and it was really nice talking to you.
I hope you took something away from that really interesting and kind of philosophical art discussion. For me, I started reflecting more on the deeper meaning behind the artwork. How can I instill stronger emotions through analysing photo references? And what message do I want to leave for the viewer? It was also just really nice to speak to a fellow colleague about art and architecture. With that, I'll see you next week for another episode of the Pixel Paper Podcast.